Okay, welcome everybody to the second Sunflower Hill financial webinar. I am John Elfin. I'm a advisor with Sunflower Hill and a past board member, and my son Jake is a resident at Sunflower Hill Irby Ranch. You may remember at our last webinar, we focused on public benefits, basic estate planning, and special needs trusts. And as I said last time, until I retired earlier this year, I was a financial advisor that focused on special needs families. And one of the main things that we always focused on, and a question that I think pretty much every special needs family has, is how much is enough to support our special needs loved ones over the course of their lifetime? And that's a fundamental question that we're going to answer tonight. Additionally, what are some of the mechanisms? What are some of the things that we can use to support that goal? So we're going to talk about special needs trusts, ABLE accounts, and how those two things can work together. And in addition to that, how can we make sure that we don't mess up public benefits when we do those two things? So I want to reintroduce our presenters. Tonight, I'm going to start off with Dan Cutter. And so Dan is a financial advisor who also focuses on special needs families. He's a senior vice president with Merrill Lynch. He's been doing this for 26 years. Dan is also an expert in special needs planning. He has written a book on special needs trusts, and his group with Merrill Lynch was recognized as Forbes Best in State Wealth Management. And I just know that we kind of ran in the same circles as Dan is just very well respected in the financial advisor world. Also presenting tonight is Ellen Cookman. Ellen is the principal of Cookman Law in Palo Alto. She focuses on estate planning and special needs trusts, and she also has an expertise in public benefits as well. As I mentioned last time, if you're not getting her newsletter and her webinars, I really encourage you to sign up for those things. It's just a great way to keep educated on those things and changes that are happening in those, in the laws and those subject matters. And then I also just want to mention Sarah Heyer, who is going to be presenting in 2 weeks, is also on the webinar this evening. Sarah is a attorney with Lathrop GPM. She focuses on trusts and estate planning and tax planning for high net worth families. She does advanced estate planning and charitable planning strategies and philanthropy. And she's been recognized as one of the best lawyers in America. So thanks, Sarah, for being on the call on the webinar tonight as well. I want to remind everybody that if you have questions, just like last time, please put your questions in the Q&A section. We'll try to answer some of those questions during the webinar by typing in answers, but then we're going to leave some time at the end of the webinar, maybe 10 minutes, to answer those questions verbally as well. One more reminder, and that is we will, just like last time, we will be sending out this video to everybody by email. So, if you miss a part of this or just have any other questions, you'll be getting a copy of this video as well afterwards. So without further ado, Dan and Ellen, why don't you take it from here?
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Let me share my screen so we can share the presentation here for everybody. All right. So thanks for having us again. My name is Dan Cutter, as John mentioned, and I'm here talking a little bit more about the financial planning piece of it. This series is the second part of the 3-part series, and it's on financial planning, tax planning, and public benefits. And so we want to, be here to encourage you to ask those questions in the chat and try to educate you in a way where, you can learn a little bit out of the presentation that we're given here. So today, wanted to talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about in addition to that. And Of course, at a financial industry, we have to show the disclaimer about everything, right? So we want to make sure that we show that for you here. And the session is titled "Loved Ones, Funding Your Loved One's Future," right? And so, as John mentioned, we're going to do a little bit of a recap before for the first session that Ellen was presenting at. For those of you who maybe missed that, she'll give a little 5 to 10 minutes summary of what that was. And then we'll talk a little bit more about my part. And then next time in a couple more weeks, we'll have Sarah's part as well. So that's the agenda that we're looking through. And here's just a little bit about what John was mentioning. Here's Ellen's, photo and some of her credentials, and here's some of mine as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Ellen here just to talk a little bit about session 1.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Dan. So what I really wanted to do is just provide highlights of things that I talked about that I think will be really helpful for today's presentation. Okay, so the first thing we talked about actually was public benefits. It's at the bottom. Okay, so public benefits, what we really need to understand is which public benefits are affected by gifts, by inheritances, and those are really the ones that are what we call needs-based public benefits. You need them because you're poor. So there's an asset limit, and really the two main ones are SSI, which is supplemental security income. That's an income stream that you can qualify for when you turn 18 and then you become poor. You can get up to about $1,200 a month, and that's intended to supplement any other income you might already be getting. And then once you get SSI, you can also qualify for Medi-Cal, which is California's version of the federal Medicaid system. The asset limit there had disappeared for a little while, but it's being reimposed next year at $130,000. So those are the things to watch out for. And that's really one reason why we need special needs trusts to hold an inheritance for a disabled loved one, because if they receive it outright or into a different type of trust, then that could bump them off those two public benefits. Okay, so then the next thing to think about is we talked about a first party special needs trust versus a third party special needs trust. And really the difference is the source of the funding. So what I mean by that is if somebody has like a litigation settlement, like they get struck in a car and there's a personal injury claim and they get their own money and they're disabled, or they become disabled, they can turn around and put their own money into a first party special needs trust. That's really not the type of trust that we're dealing with tonight. We're really talking about planning usually for parents. What are parents going to leave to their kids? And since parents are the third party in relation to their child, they need a third party special needs trust to leave their money to. And one great thing that Dan's going to be doing tonight is calculating how much do you need to leave to that third party special needs trust. All right, then another point is if anybody else wants to leave money to that third party special needs trust, you must set up what we call a standalone third party special needs trust, which means that the special needs trust can't be embedded within your own revocable trust. Okay, it has to be a separate special needs trust that can be funded at any time, because the one that we call a testamentary special needs trust within your revocable trust, it only becomes effective when you die. And that, the other person giving the money or leaving the money to your disabled loved one, you might still be alive. And so we want you to have a standalone special needs trust for that. Then another big point that we're always talking about, and welcome to the discussion, and you're probably continuing the discussion, is who should serve as trustee. All right, when you're gone, who's going to manage the money? Who's going to invest the underlying assets? Who's going to make sure that your child is really provided for? This is really the surrogate financial you. And we can have discussions that are hours long talking about, the different options. Mostly it's, we often suggest a professional, because it's really hard work to manage a trust for a disabled person for their lifetime. Asking a family member to do that is a really big ask. And a lot of times family members, they don't have the availability, they don't have the desire, they're off raising their own family. So then we would suggest that the family member can act as a trust protector, for example, when a professional is acting as trustee. Finally, what can a special needs trust pay for? And the good news is just about anything. It's very, 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 very broad. All right, so there's this fallacy out there that special needs trust can only pay for, you know, small transportation or this or that. No, no, no. It can pay for a trip to Disneyland. It can pay for really anything that improves the quality of life of your loved one, as long as it fits within that budget that Dan's going to be talking about. All right, so I think those are the hopefully the highlights from, so you don't even need to watch the video for, no, still watch it, still watch it. But then also just to mention, I do have a YouTube channel and I talk about all of these different topics on my YouTube channel. So if there's something that I mentioned that you're like, ooh, I'd like to hear more about that, just go on the YouTube channel and search that topic and my name and it should come up. Okay, now back to you, Dan.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ellen. Really appreciate it. So now that you guys know everything you need to know about special needs trusts, right, and are total experts, we're going to get into a little bit of financial planning. But I do second what Ellen says, is like her website and her videos are amazing. So if you're ever looking to get any sort of insight on, you know, something peculiar about special needs trusts or just a broad-based stroke, she does an amazing job. So, you know, definitely look her up online. You can find it pretty easily. So we're going to talk about, you know, comprehensive person-centered planning, right? And, you know, so the financial industry, well, you know, we're pretty good with numbers and, you know, financial planning, you know, it's, you know, sort of the bedrock of what a lot of people do, you know, so, you know, what is financial planning? You know, it's not rocket science, right? I think, you know, it's really figuring out what those incomes, figuring out what the income is and the assets, right? And looking at those, there's two sides of everything. And then you have your assets, your liabilities, and you really want to try to find out your goals, right? So it's really cataloging this information and figuring out where it is. And what we find is, you know, since it's not rocket science, and it's kind of common sense, it's common sense is not always, you know, common practice, right? You know, we all know we're supposed to eat right, exercise, you know, get 8 hours of sleep a night, but do we do that? Not always, right? So, you know, even though it's something that's basic, you know, it's one of those things that, you know, working with your practitioners, you know, we recommend finding people who understand this area and having them help be your accountability partner, right? You know, your attorney can help you with the process of the estate plan. It takes a little bit of time, right? And the financial professional can help you get all of this stuff done, and all of the other advocates that you work with, because it's, you know, it takes a village. And, you know, we're just here as, you know, people here, part of the village, to sort of help you get to the next step and be an accountability partner, because it takes a lot of time and it's a daunting task, and no one knows what life is going to be like, right? Like when you were 25 or 30, did you know what your next 20 years were going to look like, or your next 40 years? No, you didn't. But what we do with financial planning, the way I look at it, is it's kind of like estate planning too, in that you want to look at it every few years, right? Because if we do a projection out for 40 years, is that really going to happen? Probably not, but it's probably pretty accurate for the next couple of years. And then life happens, life changes, and then you redo a plan, or something material happens and you adjust it, or the tax rules change, or laws change, things change, right? We all know life happens, and it's important just to manage that in a way that, you know, is helpful and something that you go back to, like a business plan. You know, you don't just put it on the shelf. You pick it back up and you look at it every quarter or every couple of years, and you figure it out. So common practice is not always common, or common sense is not always common practice. So the first part of that is, you know, the traditional financial planning piece. And the second part, you know, is really talking a little bit about the special needs planning base of it, you know, where you get the different, you know, as Ellen mentioned, special needs trusts, and the understanding the government benefits and what is out there for you as a resource. You know, and families have to navigate the landscape of the different care agencies as well, and the nonprofit organizations. And it's really a, you know, a team effort, to make sure that we're, you know, this village is really there for the community, right? And so, you know, when you look at the traditional financial planning, and then you have the sort of special needs planning, the way we kind of look at it is it's really focused on a person-centered planning approach, right? Which kind of represents an integration of these two different, practices, and, it focuses more on the individual's unique goals and the preferences and quality of life, right? So, this is the approach that we take, and we want to tailor these strategies to support the different aspirations and values of you as a family and the people in your family. And, we want to make sure everybody's involved in the process, and it really gives us a sort of a social and emotional aspect of care, right? We want to make sure to promote autonomy and inclusion and dignity and everything. And we'll use the financial tools that we have to engage to get there. And so, making this person the center, right? Centering, all of the goals and expectations around that individual, we have found is the best way to go about, providing a plan that really works for a family in a supportive environment where the individual can thrive. It encourages open dialogue, and we adapt as there's changes. And, we want to also prioritize the person's voice, right? And integrate everything that we can in terms of the planning and, everything that the families can do to make sure that we secure a fulfilling life for everybody. In financial planning too, it's for a lot of us, we're planning for our own retirement, but we're also maybe planning for the retirement of our own child, right? You're almost planning for two retirements. One retirement is a lot, and is daunting, and planning for two, it can even be more daunting, right? So we don't take that lightly. We understand that, and we want to make sure that, we're really there to help, through those different transitional moments in life, and if you can, work with the practitioners you're working with, the main thing I would say, and I think John and Ellen and everyone else would echo this, is if you're, you've got a broken arm, you don't go to your general practitioner doctor, right? You go to some specialist that can help, with the surgery or whatever it might be. And it's kind of the same thing for, a practitioner. You don't go to a regular estate planning attorney that doesn't understand special needs trusts. You go to the special needs attorneys that understand that. And the same thing for the financial folks as well, because I think financial folks do a pretty good job of understanding risk and return, and helping people with goals, but they don't understand all of the other layers with special needs. So we'd really recommend finding practitioners that do. And this isn't just a commercial for Merrill Lynch; it's more of a commercial to finding the right people in your community to work with you. And so, want to make sure just to stress that, because we find oftentimes, if that's not done, sometimes during times of crisis, things weren't set up properly. And that's when you need to bring these other people in to sort of fix the problem. And then everything is twice as costly, or some issue happened that you never wanted to happen. So make sure you're working with the practitioners that, work with the community. And so it's kind of where the rubber meets the road is in the spending plan. And we like the language of spending plan better than a budget, because I think, when you think of a budget, it's a more of a limiting language, right? It doesn't give us, it tells us what we're cutting out. A spending plan is more of something where, it's an adventure. This is what we can do, right? And we want to, be mindful of that to understand, to help you understand what you can do, and not just say we have to cut this out, we have to cut that out. So we want to make sure to be mindful of the language we use, and also, focus our abilities and what we do into something that works for everybody, right? And I think, as I mentioned before, our industry doesn't do a great job of doing the comprehensive financial planning. I think usually when not a lot of people budget, not a lot of people do full financial planning. Most people do their estate plan when their parents die. It's one of those things that we know we need to get done. And when I ask a question, at any sort of presentation, I always ask, show of hands at the events on, who's done comprehensive financial planning and actually adheres to a budget. And I'd say less than 10% of the people, raise their hands. So we know it's daunting. And again, we just want to, make sure to find those accountability partners and help you at every stage through this process. Because, you might have an idea of some of the things, but, maybe the back of the envelope calculation or an Excel spreadsheet doesn't give you all of the information. We want to make sure that we really look at more sophisticated tools. We want to look at the inflation costs. We want to look at what sort of taxation there is out there. We want to make sure to use the current life expectancy and so forth, and figure out what sort of tools outside of that to use, but what sort of accounts to use as well. And a lot of it comes to, for us in the financial planning piece, is using a tool that has, just in terms of a technical term, it's called Monte Carlo simulation. And that's a fancy word to essentially say probability analysis. And so what we want to solve for is the highest probability that we can get, right? And the way Monte Carlo simulation works is it runs 3,000 iterations. So it's like living 3,000 lives, right? And then what we do is we take the 80% through line, and that's the numbers that we see, right? So it essentially what it's saying is we're 80% confident that this is what it's going to look like. And again, remember I said in the beginning is, it's not going to be for a 40-year time period. That's what we're going to look at ultimately, but it's never going to be like that because things always change, right? So it's going to be good for a few years to see, and then we're going to adjust it as time goes by, because maybe we're spending a little bit more where we thought we weren't. Maybe the market's underperforming or it's outperforming. There's lots of things that can give you an idea of where things are going, but we want to make sure that once we create the financial plan, it gives us a roadmap, right? Really, and that's the piece that in talking to clients is they say that really helps them, because it helps them understand a year to 5 years from now if they're on that right path that they want it to be on. And we're going to help you with the guardrails to make sure that you stay on that path, and and meeting with all your practitioners and the specialists. As long as you're doing that consistently, you're going to be able to measure that. And I'm a big believer of what you measure you can manage, and what you can manage you can leverage. So if you're not measuring things consistently, you're going to have a harder time knowing and feeling good about it, right? Because ultimately, we don't know what the future is going to hold. But if we have some sort of plan set in place, at least we have an idea at that moment in time how good it's going to be. And that's what I hear helps families sleep a little bit better at night, because they've done all of the planning in order to do that. And they know that life is going to happen, but the people that they've selected will help their family when they're no longer around. So really, the big piece is figuring out that, plan for yourselves and working with your practitioners to get to that. So in part of doing the Monte Carlo simulation, the modeling it's more than just projecting numbers. It's really about creating a dynamic plan that adjusts to your lifestyle. And for us, what we find, the tool that allows these different what if scenarios is very important. It allows us to use the tool more as a decision framework, right? We're analyzing whether we can, do we buy the home or do we rent the home? Do we finance the home? How do we do that? So it's pretty hard to know what's the right thing to do, but we can do that in a risk-free environment through financial planning and using the Monte Carlo simulation to allow yourself to figure out what that could look like in the future, right? And it's a great tool that you can use not just once, but all the time. Think of it as sort of the new AI, right, version. This has been around for a long time, but it's the AI that can kind of show you how it's going to look, right? And it's risk-free. You can run different iterations, and the people, it's sort of like the prompts for AI, right? The more creative you are in terms of the questions you ask, the better your answers are going to be, and it's going to give you clarity on making those decisions. So it's kind of like the prompt engineer, right? Give a good prompt and you put good information in, you'll get good information back. So when you're doing that, you want to make sure so what we like to do and what we typically recommend is you want to look at your situation, your family situation first. If you're a husband and wife or spouse and you don't know what your situation looks like, we'll run that first. Once we have that finalized and looking really good, we'll see how much is going to be distributed. It could be distributed to one child. If you have one, maybe you have multiple children. Maybe you have typical or neurodiverse children and you have different percentages going to each. We can plan for that and we can look at that to see what it looks like, right? And so that's the valuable tool that we can use. And we can also plan for different goals, education analysis, things of that nature. We can have SSI come in or out. We can use public, benefits and without public benefits. So really the ideas are endless. And, you don't run 100 of these, right? It's not as quick as AI where it's going to run 100 of them in like a couple minutes. It takes time to do it, but still you want to make sure that, you're answering all those questions and to be able to feel better and sleep better at night. And so when we do that, I talked a little bit about the 80% probability, and that's the number that we like to look at and we like to focus on. We think the 80% probability, it sure gives us the best number. We don't want to solve for 100% because nothing in life is guaranteed, right? 100% is very hard. So what we found over time, 80% is a good number that most people like. But if you're more conservative, we could always adjust and change it to 90% or 95, right? That's going to impact the numbers. But then again, that's the benefit of, every person is an individual. Every family is an individual. Every family's financial situation is different. Everybody's family situation is different. And we start talking multiple generations with grandparents as well, and money's flowing through family to family. You can really put a lot of good plans out there and really test this in this environment. So, so we like the 80%. We think it's the best one to look for when we're doing these financial plans. And we'll get to a case study a little bit later that sort of talks about that as well. So with the scenario planning, for us, as I mentioned, the what if scenario planning is the most powerful feature. And, as an example, when we look at things, we can look at things, through a public only lens. We can look at it through a public and private sort of partnership where you've got a lot of public funding, but you as a private, family and individual is paying for those supplemental needs and cares, or you can look at the private only. And this is something that we can test right in that environment. And just as an example, let me just give an example here. If let's say you've got $100,000 of expenses per year, okay? And if you're privately paying that, let's say, so that means you're spending $100,000 in care for your loved one for the next 50 years. With a 3% rate of inflation, that comes to $11 million. That's a pretty big number, right? And that's also a long time frame, 50 years. So that's at 3% inflation. If you go to 4% inflation, that's $15 million, right? So that's a lot of money. And that's if you're private paying everything. So let's just half that, right? If the public, government benefits, Medi-Cal, IHSS, Section 8 housing, regional center paying for some stuff, right? Say it's 50%, so that's half. So 5.5 million at a 3% rate of inflation, or 7.5%, or 7.5 million at 4% inflation. So these numbers can get really big, really quick. And, testing it out is as I've mentioned, I'm not trying to beat a dead horse, but that's always the best route to take and fulfill in order to feel that you're putting together the sort of next best steps. So as we transition from planning, once we finish that plan, a lot of people ask, well, what do we do to fund it, and how do we fund it? So, funding a special needs trust, there's several different asset types that can fund it. You can put real estate in the special needs trust, and the family, for example, the individual, maybe a 20-year-old, the question is, do we put the SNT do we put the house in the SNT or do we not? it's an exempt asset. You don't have to, right? But should you, right? What are the costs? What are the pros and cons of that? And that's something, you talk to Ellen about, or you talk to your attorneys and try to figure out what makes the most sense for you, and looking for that education and getting that information. And rules and laws could change where 10 years later maybe it shifts and then something happens. So there's lots of different ways to fund a special needs trust, and we talked a little bit about funding it in the session 1. And funding it is essentially changing the title of an account to the trust. A lot of people, I've seen people go through, filling out lots of forms, working with their attorney, spending money, time, effort, creating a trust and or a special needs trust, but then forgetting to fund that trust. And, it's just the last step you need to do in order to just change the title. Because if you don't fund it, there are going to be issues, right? And a great plan can be, it could torpedo an entire great plan. And the other thing about funding, is we talked before, is you want to make sure there's different types of assets, right? You have regular investments. It's another great funding mechanism, whether that's cash or stocks or bonds or any sort of security, that liquid security, right? You can fund special needs trusts with that. And, as Ellen mentioned, that could be the standalone trust, right? It doesn't spring out of your revocable living trust. It's maybe you put it there because of gifting purposes. Maybe a parent or a grandparent would put money into that when they pass away, right? So funding the special needs trust is important, and how you write that plan is important too, because you want to fund the right vehicles, because we really want the third party special needs trust as opposed to the first party special needs trust. So another funding mechanism.
Oh, Dan, I just wanted to add a few things, but
Yep.
okay, thanks. Okay, so one thing to keep in mind is usually a special needs trust doesn't get funded until the parents are gone. So really, our first priority when you do your estate plan is to fund your own revocable trust. Make sure that you retitle everything properly, because that's what often gets missed. And it's typically when you die, that's during the trust administration process. That's when things get titled from your revocable trust over to the special needs trust. So a lot of people ask me, well, I have this standalone special needs trust. Shouldn't I put something in it? Like it's a basket, it should be filled, right? And the answer is usually not. Usually it's kind of waiting. You are the special needs trust while you're alive. You are providing for your child, and there's no reason to put things into the special needs trust and then go out of it, right? So, so just wait, keep it in your revocable trust. You're not actually transferring to the special needs trust, but it is important to make sure that the right things go into the special needs trust. And on that note, I just wanted to mention, I think it's great to put a house into a special needs trust, but just make sure you have enough cash to support the house. I've seen situations where people put in the house and like $100,000. And usually that's not enough to pay for property taxes, roof repairs, anything. When you think about owning a house, I mean, it's a great investment, but it's also very expensive, right? So making sure that you've calculated out 50 years of roof repairs and everything else that needs to be purchased, in addition to having that house there. So the house goes in, but also a good chunk of change.
I also I don't know if anyone was going to cover this, but for a standalone special needs trust to communicate with grandparents or other family members to make sure their estate flows into that special needs trust. And I'll let Dan or Ellen or Sarah talk about that.
Yeah, great point, John and Ellen. Thanks for stepping in there. And with the all of this sort of planning, right, it's very tedious, right? And as you go through, the different process, and it's one of those things you just got to kind of love the process of doing it. And so another thing that some people use, and this is sort of a law change happened, back in, was it 2019, I think, in Secure Act 1.0, where used to be where you don't put any sort of retirement account into a special needs trust. And then Secure Act 2.0 or 1.0 came out and essentially sort of flipped the script on that. And essentially what that means is when someone was to receive an inherited IRA, that's a non-spouse, right? Because it goes from one spouse to the next. It's the next generation typically. They had to deplete that account within 10 years. So any retirement account that you had has to be depleted pretty much within 10 years. And what Secure Act 1.0 changed was, well, if it's a designated beneficiary for exempt people, one could be someone with a terminal illness, another one is a person with a disability, you can stretch that out over the lifetime of the individual. So, say you've got a 20-year-old that has a normal life expectancy, that could be another 60 to 70 years where you can stretch out getting tax deferred money over that time. And so that's going to be great growth as opposed to being distributed within 10 years, right? And that's just a situation where, for the life of the special needs trust, no one ever was supposed to really almost put it IRA or 401k into it, but then everything changed because of a law change and a rule change. And just again, one of those things why you always go back to estate planning and financial planning every few years, because things do change and life happens. And then a final thing that you can use, what a lot of people do, especially for an account, a special needs trust that's inside of your revocable living trust, is maybe you don't have the assets for it. And, a good way to create an estate is through life insurance. And, life insurance can really be beneficial in that regard to fund the special needs trust. Or, there's other ways that Sarah will probably talk about it in her talk as well. Later on in a couple of weeks, it can be used as a tool for estate planning, additional estate planning as well. So we'll talk a little bit about life insurance. And again, what we're trying to do today and with this presentation is to sort of give you a 30,000-foot view of, what things look like, right? And then from there, we can drill down a little bit, but, there's so much to cover in these time periods that we can't cover everything. So we just want to give you a little bit of flavor of it. So it was just going to talk a little bit about life insurance and what that looks like, right? For most people understand life insurance, but just to go a little bit deeper on it, to give you a little better sense of what it is. You have your term insurance versus your permanent insurance. Your term insurance you can buy or you have with your company essentially, right? So maybe a 45-year-old, I like using term insurance for income replacement because it's pretty inexpensive. So if you're like 45 and let's say you retire at 65, you buy a 20-year term policy. So if you die prematurely, that will help your family, right? If you were to die prematurely. If you live past 65, great, you didn't die, right? You don't get the money, but you didn't die. So that's a good thing. If there's two things in life, death and taxes, right? So we know we're all not getting out of here alive. So permanent insurance is one way to, help fund that special needs trust, as I mentioned. And, the permanent insurance, there's really, a couple types. Whole life is the first one. And essentially whole life is kind of what people think of when they think of permanent life insurance. You have it for your entire life, right? It's got fixed premiums, guaranteed death benefit, your cash value grows steadily, right? That's what people think of when they think of permanent insurance. And then there's this more flexible way to pay the premiums called universal life. And universal life essentially means you can adjust those premiums a little bit or the death benefits. And you can do that different ways. One can be through a variable universal life, which essentially there's an extra cash bucket, and that cash bucket can be invested in security. So there's a little bit more risk there. Or you can have an indexed universal life, which essentially puts it in an index fund. So when you hear people throwing out these terms, just gives you a better sense of having a little bit of understanding of how it works, the term versus the permanent, because a lot of folks use this to really fund their, the third-party special needs trusts through the revocable living trusts. So we're going to talk a little bit about ABLE accounts as well, because ABLE accounts are a new thing, and I'm sure most people are probably aware of them, but if they're not, so ABLE essentially stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience. And it was created as in a tax-advantaged way and sort of like a savings account designed specifically for people with disabilities. And it's akin to the 529 plans. There's sort of like the sister account to that. So a 529 plan is an educational plan where you put money into an investment, it grows tax-free, and you can take it out tax-free for paying for the education of the individual, right? So Congress passed a law, Achieving a Better Life experience, right? And it allows you to put money into an account without jeopardizing any SSI or Medicaid or anything like that, right? And these funds are available to be used for a wide array of things. As Ellen mentioned, a lot of people think special needs trusts you can't do a lot with them and it's limiting, but it's pretty expansive, and an ABLE account is pretty expansive as well. As long as it's for a qualified disability expense, you should be good, and most things qualify. So it's pretty flexible and it's a great planning tool. We'll talk a little bit about eligibility rules, and I think they're changing a little bit. So right now it's if up until age 26, if you have a disability, you can open one. And I believe California, you can actually have an individual with a disability open one on their own. And it's a good independence tool, right, to allow and to have access to. And you can fund it with contributions. You can fund $19,000 per year. You just want to make sure it doesn't get over 100,000 if you're getting SSI, right? If you're getting SSI, if it goes over $100,000, then you're going to lose your benefit for that month. Essentially, and the way the Social Security Administration looks at it is they look at it at the end of every month. And so say you're at $105,000 because you got some market appreciation, then you take out $10,000 for a distribution for something to get you back under that level, and then you're back on. You don't get revoked and turned off. It's just sort of an off and on switch. You can get off and get back on. So it's not as bad as losing government benefits, right? And that's really difficult to get back on. So they really tried to make these accounts pretty flexible. Having it at $100,000 is, we wish it was higher. We wish it was better. And it actually is if, you as a family member your child is getting SSDI as opposed to SSI. If you're getting SSDI, you can put in, I think it's $529,000 at CalAble. Every state is a little bit different, but I think California ABLE account will allow you to put a little bit more in. Were there any? I saw there was a hand up. I didn't know if I can't see the questions right now. So John, I don't know if you see any questions or anything.
I did see a hand. I did see a hand, but let's keep on going and wait until the end.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. So in terms of the best practices when it comes to, work with ABLE accounts, we want to make sure that, each expense is, for a qualified disability expense, like housing and education and transportation and things like that. But we also want to make sure to utilize it in combination with other tools, right? The ABLE account can be used in combination with a special needs trust. The ABLE account is also something that can give you a little bit more independence, as I sort of mentioned before. And there's a way that you can use the ABLE account to make sure that, I'll give an example. If, let's say your child is 20 years old and still living with you and getting SSI, right? If you're getting SSI and your child's living with you, you're providing what they call in-kind support and maintenance. Right. And so if you're providing that, you're not supposed to provide that without getting a deduction because SSI is supposed to pay for room and shelter and food. And, in state of California, that's pretty easy, right? Anyone can live on $900, a month. Yeah, super easy. Rent and everything. Sure. It is very, very difficult, as everyone knows, right? So if you can use the ABLE account, so you can gift, let's say you're going to charge $1,000 for rent a month, right? So you gift $1,000, you gift $12,000 at the beginning of the year to the ABLE account, and each month you pay the $1,000 from the ABLE account for the rent. And so when you do that, what that's going to do is it's not going to charge, you're not going to get the deduction for the ISM, so you'll get the full SSI amount. And so, working with practitioners and, working with your attorney, they can help you set that up and really, maximize those benefits, because, an extra 300, I think it's $343 it is, something like that. I know there's going to be a change next year, somewhere in that range. If you annualize that, you annualize it, then you take it for the next 20 years or 30 years, that becomes a big number, especially if you can invest that. So any little thing that you can do to use these new tools out there is going to be beneficial. And, having that partnership, with your practitioners is really helpful in this regard. And also, because a lot of times you created a special needs trust 15 years ago and you haven't looked at it since, and this has come within the last 15 years, right? And so, checking in with your estate planning attorney that did it, or if your estate planning attorney is no longer around, I know 2 great estate planning attorneys that might be on this call that would love to have a conversation with you about it. So hopefully, going through all of this really helps you understand more about the special needs trusts, how you fund the special needs trusts, what they look like, some of the best tools, and how these work together most efficiently. So once we've sort of gone through all of those steps and stages, I just wanted to take you through a quick little case study. And the case study, I was a big fan. I watched with my kids, Parks and Rec, and I loved it. So we sort of made the case study of Leslie Knope and Ben Wyatt on their case study, good old town of Pawnee, Indiana. And so when this case study, what it's going to look at, let's say, the family has Leslie is 59, Ben 60. They've got 3 kids. 2 are neurotypical twins at 23. Danny's 20. He's neurodivergent, and he was a Down syndrome diagnosis. So the plan here was we were having the mother of Leslie, so Danny's grandmother, passed away and named Danny as an individual for his inheritance. And so because we had that issue and we didn't really do the financial planning, I was going to let Ellen talk a little bit about some of the things you can do in a situation like that on the estate planning side. And we're going to look later about the numbers in terms of the assets you see down below. And we're going to run those 3 scenarios of the public, the private, and then the private. So Ellen, did you want to talk a little bit about the estate planning things you can do in that scenario?
There we go. Sure. Yeah. So I think the first point that he was talking about is, what if Danny got an inheritance from grandma? Let's say he got, $100,000 or $200,000. And one thing that John had mentioned earlier when we were talking about gifting is, you want to make sure that everybody in the family knows about Danny's special needs trust. So hopefully grandma had revised her estate plan to leave Danny's inheritance to his third-party special needs trust that his parents had set up. Now, if she didn't, then Danny might need a first-party special needs trust to put that inheritance into to protect for public benefits. I wish that he could put it into an ABLE account, but ABLE accounts can only receive up to the gift tax amount every year, which is $19,000, so that wouldn't cover it. The parents need a revocable living trust here in California. Maybe back in the other state that they were living, probate is easier and stuff, but here in California, probate is awful. And if you have a will, you're still going through probate. So you want a revocable living trust to hold the parents' assets, their savings, their house, all of that. Then they set up a standalone special needs trust for Danny. Danny might need a conservatorship, a limited conservatorship here. That's a topic for another day, but that could be. Once Danny's 18, since he has under $2,000 of countable assets, then he can apply for SSI, and he can also qualify for Medi-Cal. Before age 18, typically everybody in California, all kids can qualify for Medi-Cal. Once you turn 18, you're under a different umbrella in the Medi-Cal system. And then there's other public benefits that he might qualify for. If he needs help with his activities of daily living at home, he can get in-home supportive services. He might qualify as a member of the regional center. There's a great Self-determination plan is now available through the regional center, which I really like. You should look into that if you have a child who's a member of the regional center. SNAP benefits, we all know what's going on with that at the moment, but hopefully it's going to be funded again, right? Section 8 housing, super important as well. So those are a few options here.
Awesome. Thanks. Appreciate it. And so we've probably got about 5 more minutes until we're wrapping this up and getting to questions. I'm going to go through the scenarios, but just so you know, the 3 scenarios that we're testing for are the public only, where Danny's spending about $17,200. Then we're doing the public-private, where he's spending about $86,200. And then the private only, when he's spending about $157,000. So we're going to see that risk-free environment on how we can, plan for that and what we look at typically. So getting to that, so essentially we can see here, the tool will show us Danny's clothing, right? All of these different things in terms of the expenses, right? This is the spending plan, what we can spend for. And we can see there's 2 big numbers there, really. There, if you guys can't see the screen, I'll read it. The custodial care is about $100,000, right? And the rent, let's say, is about $30,000. This is per year, okay? And so this is the parent situation. This is Ben and Leslie, right? This is their financial plan, but they're paying for their child, right? Until until they're no longer around, they're paying. But they also have their own costs, which is about $150,000 in this per year. So we had the salary income of $75,000 and $250,000, and then they're going to earn Social Security as well. So these are the inputs that we put in there, right? And then this is another one that's going to be a little bit harder to read here, maybe. But on the left-hand side, this is a table that essentially shows what happens to the money in the future. We saw before that they had a net worth much higher than $4.5 million. We don't include the house in here because the house is not a liquid asset, right? You can't sell the bedroom to get some money to pay for stuff, right? That's an asset that's illiquid. So we're only looking at the liquid money here. And so on the left-hand side, we see the years, and then we see the ages of the parents, right? And then we've got different rows here of, the taxable savings, any sort of portfolio generated income, the taxes that we have to pay, the different goals and expenses, right? That's the spending plan right there. And then the net amount. I might actually need my glasses to see. I think it's about 349 we were saying is about the spending amount. So essentially, the 2 right columns are what we're looking at. Remember we talked about the 80% probability? So the 80% probability is on the right-hand side, where it says our potential wealth with 80% likelihood. And what this essentially means is this is the ending value each year on what the assets could look like based off all these given inputs, right? We gave our prompts, and here's the finished version of what it looks like. So we can see that the blue area is what is being pulled from the portfolio. And we can see the numbers at 4 million. Over the years, it starts to get a little bit lower. In 2040, it's down to 2.8 million. And then the next page, we can see that money's really starting to run out, right? It's 2.5. And then in year 2047, when they're 80 and 81, it sort of goes negative, right? So this is the private pay version, right? They're paying all of that money themselves out of pocket, that $100,000 a year, right, for custodial care, that $30,000 for rent, and all those other outputs in terms of the costs. So they're not able to fund this lifestyle that they want. And so what does that mean? They're going to have to rely on government benefits as well to help. Or they're going to have to talk to other people if there's other family members that are willing to help contribute, right? And do we send a standalone special needs trust because someone might gift to that, right? That's one of those things that we want to look for. So if we see this number here on the end, it keeps increasing, and down at the bottom, when they're both 96, it's like 12.3 million. I think I skipped the next page, which is when they're like supposed to die at 98. It's closer to 15 million. But what I'm going to show you is the scenario analysis that we test for. Okay. And so you see the one that's highlighted here. This is the private only. The one to the right is the public-private partnership, and then the far right is the public-only partnership. And if we look at the top, what we see up here at the top essentially is we've got 96% probability with only about a 299% shortfall for the public-private partnership. We saw earlier here, we had a $2.8 million shortfall. So we only had a 71 probability of achieving that funding ratio right over here. And then the public only one, if we look to the far right, it gives us 147 probability. So that means we are fully funded and we have a surplus of 2.1 million, right? So I know the numbers get pretty big and it's a lot of information, but I also wanted just to kind of show you a couple other things with regard to the probabilities. And so, we mentioned, how we mentioned 80% probability. If we look down below the 71 here, we see a 80%, a 50%, and a 30%. So essentially what this was that ending value at the end on the far right that we were looking at before. And so this says we're 80% confident it'll be around less 15 million negative, right? But then the 50 is at 4.2 negative and the 30% is at 5.6 million. So this is a spectrum of outcomes, right? And, it's a broad range, negative 15 million to 5 million. We got a $20 million difference because there's a long-term time period. And as I was talking earlier in the presentation, we're not solving for the very end, right? But it's also going to help us, though, in terms of understanding some of the choices. It's not going to look like this, but this is what it could be as we make these decisions. The public-private partnership, you can see it's 3.4 million, 80% to 25 million. Those are big numbers, right? When we run these plans, what we typically find is that it's somewhere between the 80 and the 50. That's what it ends up coming to, somewhere in that range for the most part over time. The last 15 years have been very good in the stock market, so it's been the 30%, but that's not for the lifetime of this person's lifestyle. That's just for the last 15 years. And then we see the public only one. Look at that range, 15 million to 41 million. That's huge. So these numbers do get big, but it also shows you that if you can use the resources and you are able to do that, it really makes an impact. But the question becomes, sometimes those resources that you might be utilizing might not be the situation you want for your child. Maybe it's a board and care, right? Where you would rather have them have their own house with roommates and 24/7 care, right? Those are trade-offs, those are costs. And just showing this is how we test for it. And you can essentially see just down below, we basically, for the public-private, we halved it. So instead of 100 grand, you're paying 50,000. And I think that's kind of where we end up in terms of, going through the analysis and everything. And
Dan, I just wanted to mention, I'm glad you're wrapping up. Just wanted to give you a heads up. We're at 7:27.
Okay, perfect. So just in terms of the key takeaways, comprehensive financial planning, understand the special needs trust aspect of it, funding the model and doing the testing is important. You really want us to have that person-centered approach as well, working with practitioners, and wanted to give you a case study that maybe you could use for your own situation and get a good understanding of it. But for the presentation on talking about funding your loved one's lifestyle and their lifetime, that's what we wanted to cover and see. I guess turn it over now for any sort of questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dan and Ellen. I actually, I think because we were pretty aggressive in answering the questions within the Q&A, I actually don't see any open questions at the moment. So I wanted to thank you guys so much for a great presentation. I want to just set the table for the next presentation, which I'm really excited about. Sarah is going to give it in 2 weeks, 2 weeks from tonight, same time. And it's going to be something that I've never seen within the context of special needs planning. And it's going to be a focus on advanced estate planning and tax planning for federal gift and estate tax planning, charitable planning, again, within the context of special needs planning. So I'm really excited about it. Again, Sarah is going to present in 2 weeks. So if you haven't signed up, you can sign up on sunflowerhill.org under events. It might even be on our main page. So again, just to remind everybody, a recording of the session is going to be sent out in a couple days. So thanks so much, Ellen and Dan and Sarah. And thanks everybody for attending. And hopefully we'll see you in a couple weeks. And I don't know if Ellen or Dan wanted to sign off or say anything before we leave.
No, I just want to say thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. And, it's valuable that, you guys, thank you, John, also for putting on the series. It's great to be able to provide education anytime that we can. So thank you very much.
Okay. All right, everybody. Thanks. Great job.